When I first started using the Presonus PD-70, there's a couple of questions that really jumped out at me. The first is, how is this microphone so good at this price point? And why have I never heard of it before? And I think the answer to that question primarily comes down to one thing. And that is, Presonus is known as a software company, and only recently have they started developing and selling microphones. And if you were a traditional microphone company and you were interested in producing a product for this sort of budget level podcast, broadcast style microphone category, I think you have to be very, very conscious of not making that microphone too good, because it could cannibalize and take away market share from your bigger, more expensive microphones, which are a huge part of your core business. Where Presonus was primarily a software company that has now introduced some budget-friendly microphones. And I think that allowed them to come out with an entry-level price point product, which has performance which is better than some of the microphones that I have used that have cost $300 or more. And in fact, my main studio microphone previously was a $300+ microphone, and I have just replaced that microphone with the Presonus PD-70. And in full disclosure, Presonus did send out this PD-70 for the purpose of this review, but the thoughts in this video are my own, and you are actually going to get to hear this microphone directly compared to other microphones in this category at a similar price point. And when you buy the PD-70 and open the box, what you get is pretty straightforward. You're simply getting the microphone, you're getting the windscreen, you're getting a 1/2 inch to 3/8 inch stand adapter, and a little bit of documentation. And that's pretty much it. The other thing that is included in the box is a code to get some free software from Presonus. It's the Studio One suite of software, which is particularly good if you're a musician. It also has the ability to download a whole bunch of tracks, like 68 gigabytes of sort of music loops and tracks. So if you're somebody who's into mixing music, this can actually add a significant amount of value. When you compare that to some of the other microphones at this price point, it is impressive that that kind of software is actually included. And when you pick up this microphone, the first thing you're going to notice is how heavy it is. It sort of feels like it's made of lead or gold. It does feel like an old school microphone that you sort of can buy and use for many, many years and is going to last forever. I was so surprised at how heavy it was when I took it out of the box. I immediately handed it to my family members and said, "Feel this," of which when you hand it off to them, their hands drop because it is so heavy. So it does have an extremely good quality feel. It also has the single one-sided yoke mount, which works really well and is super, super strong. It holds the mic in position really well. And I think it's a cool design. It actually looks quite cool. And it's hard to look at this microphone without comparing it to the SM7B because it has a very similar design, particularly the top. And what you'll actually find is the windscreen part and the cage beneath is almost identical to the SM7B. In fact, so much so that you can actually buy SM7B foam wind covers and they will fit directly on this. And I have actually bought one of the big foam puffs that you can get for the SM7B, which is used just to sort of knock down plosives a little bit better, and it also sort of gives the microphone a bit of a darker sound. So because of that, you can actually tweak the sound of the mic by getting these different wind muffs or plosive filters that are actually made for the SM7B, and you can use it on your Presonus PD-70. Now the specs in the microphone are sort of reasonably standard. It's a cardioid polar pattern capsule. It has a frequency response to from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. But the thing that I do like about it is if you look at the frequency graph, it is a reasonably steady and flat graph. It actually boosts a bit in the highs just to give you a bit more clarity, which kind of helps you cut through a music bed and just takes away sort of that dark muffled tone that you often get from sort of broadcast dynamic microphones of this type. So it gives you a bit more clarity than the average broadcast dynamic microphone. But because the frequency graph is reasonably flat and not sort of tuned and lumpy up and down like some of the other broadcast dynamic microphones at around this price point, you are able to easily EQ the audio. And sort of, if you want a little bit more bass, you just bump up the little bass a bit. And I found it a very, very easy microphone to work with in editing and equalization. Now, that compares to some other microphones, particularly the Rode Podmic, which is a very popular microphone, which seems to be tuned to be used just sort of straight out of the microphone. And once you start messing with the editing of your audio, the fact that you've got sort of these sort of lumpy EQ graph, or you've got this lumpy frequency response graph on that, makes that audio a little bit harder for me to edit. So I really do like the PD-70 because it gives me a really clean, clear signal straight out of the box without doing any EQ to it, but it's very, very easy to EQ and make it kind of sound any way I really want. And in a lot of ways, this makes sense since Presonus makes software to sort of edit audio. You would think that they would want a microphone that the audio it puts out is quite easy to tweak and edit, and they certainly have provided that with the PD-70. And one of my favorite things about this mic, which I still am trying to get my head around how it does this or why it works this way, is it's great at rejecting background noise and reverberation off the walls. But it also gives you a really good, clean and clear signal from my voice, even when I don't have perfect microphone technique, and even if I have the microphone just off to the side of my mouth and I'm not speaking straight down the center of it. Some microphones get this sort of weird off color, or you sort of get this really muffled sound if you sort of speak the way I'm speaking to the PD-70 now, with just it off to the side of my mouth a little bit. I don't know what it is or why, but I particularly have that problem with the Samson Q9U and a few other microphones in this category. But this microphone really is forgiving if your microphone technique is imperfect, which mine is, and particularly for YouTube. Often you're sort of focusing on demonstrating or looking at the camera, and you won't always have perfect microphone technique. You're often in an imperfect sound environment, and I'm in this small, reverberant room. It's really kind of just a storage closet, and it's very forgiving of the bouncing and the sounds coming off the wall and that reverb. It really, really knocks that down. And I don't know how it does both of those things together, but it does, and I am super, super impressed with that quality of this microphone. Now let's jump into some comparisons of this microphone compared to some other microphones that are popular for this sort of in-shot microphone YouTube style shot and podcasts. And I think you're going to be really impressed with the way this microphone sort of stacks up against some of these microphones, some of them much more expensive, much more well-known and more popular than the PD-70. Now you listen to the Behringer XM8500. This is approximately a $30 microphone, and it is the cheapest XLR dynamic microphone that I ever recommend to people. It's actually too light to actually keep the boom arm down, and it is a handheld dynamic microphone, something that doesn't really look as good in shot as the other microphones that I'm going to share with you today. But because it is the cheapest microphone that I ever recommend, and I actually think it sounds all right, I thought it was worth giving you a comparison to this microphone. Right now you're listening to the Behringer XM8500. All right, now we're back in the PD-70, just giving you a audio baseline between the microphones just so you can hear what it sounds like as we go through these different microphones. Right now you're listening to the sound of the Presonus PD-70. Now you're listening to the CAD Audio Super D. This is another budget broadcast dynamic microphone for sort of YouTube and podcast. It costs around $100. It also includes a shock mount and sort of an inexpensive boom arm, so you've got sort of a whole base level kit there. Right now you're listening to the Podmaster Super D. Now we're back on the Presonus PD-70. Once again, just cleansing your audio palette. This is the sound you're going to get out of the Presonus PD-70. Listen for the clarity, listen to the bass response. This is what the microphone sounds like just straight out of the box with no equalization. Now we're listening to the Rode Podmic, and this is probably the most popular podcasting, budget dynamic podcasting microphone on the market today. It certainly looks very, very good, and I think that is a big reason for its popularity. It isn't great at plosive rejection, and I also find that it sort of only works for some people's voices in some environments. I do find it isn't quite as easy to EQ as the Presonus PD-70, but it is a similar priced microphone, and it is for the same purpose. It's also probably the most popular one, so I think it's always worth considering and comparing this microphone. Now we're back on the Presonus PD-70. This is how it sounds. Once again, just giving you another audio sample between the microphones. Right now you're listening to the Presonus PD-70. Now you're listening to the Samson Q9U. This is an XLR and USB microphone all in one. It is about twice the price as the Presonus PD-70, but if you do use it in USB-C mode, then you don't actually have to have an audio interface, so you actually save that money. It is a broadcast dynamic cardioid polar pattern similar to the Presonus PD-70. I don't think this microphone gives you quite the level of clarity, but it does have a lot of sort of options and extra functions because it does have some switches on the back to boost your mids or cut your lows, and it also has the versatility of working with USB-C as well as XLR. And if you're interested in pricing on any of these microphones, I will put in the description down below a link that allows you to click through on each one and then go directly to the product and Instagram pricing page with a number of the top suppliers. That way you can sort of shop with confidence and know you are getting the best price on whichever microphone you thought sounded best. And for me, of all the budget dynamic microphones I have tested so far, for in-shot microphones for YouTube videos like this or for podcasts, I think the Presonus PD-70 far and away is the best performer. I love the fact that it sounds great sort of straight out of the box and I don't have to do anything to it if I don't want. I love the fact that it really works well in this sort of small, super reverberant room where my voice is sort of bouncing off the walls everywhere and rejects those sounds really, really well. And I love the fact that it is neutral enough that I can easily EQ it and make it sound any way that I want. And if you're interested in finding success with your YouTube channel or podcast with gear that you can afford or the gear that you already have, that's exactly what I do on this channel. So be sure to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit that bell notification.